Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. I am joined today by Greg from Science Studio. We're going to be sitting down for kind of a casual discussion on the GTX 1060 as well as the RX 480. So for people that aren't maybe familiar with you, Greg, what do you do over on your channel?
Well, from what it looks like, pretty much the same stuff you do. Just review a bunch of technology, a lot of computer-based components. We'll do PC builds, benchmarks, all the good stuff. Pretty much whatever you want to see on the channel, we can make happen.
Yeah, we pretty much, both of us have kind of been doing similar content around like the 480 and talking about a lot of the same topics. So that's kind of how we came together. I was like, let's get together and do a video and kind of discuss what's going on right now with the 1060, because it's pretty exciting right now, this whole mid-range market, which usually doesn't get as much attention as we're seeing right now.
And that's thanks, I think, in part to the RX 480 here, just being at that $200 sweet spot. If you're going for the 8 gig, $239, I think MSRP. It's just it's I think the sweet spot in terms of the FPS per dollar, and that's kind of been that way around 200 to 300 bucks. And so now we're seeing Nvidia follow suit in that, and that's pretty interesting because it seems like both of these cards are going to be fairly competitive.
Yeah, AMD basically came out and was just like, we're not even going after the high end right now. We're going to let you just have that one for now, Nvidia. We're going right after the $250 price point because we see that that's where the majority of gamers are at, under that $300 price point. So they've just went straight after that. And now just a couple of weeks later, we see Nvidia come back with a counterpunch with the GTX 1060 at $249, which is like right there.
Yeah, they didn't let it last long, did they? The AMD fan raid was there for about 2 weeks, and there were a bit of controversy involved with the card and the power issues and all that, but that seems to be a very isolated issue. And on top of that, I think it's interesting that AMD decided to do it this way. They decided to release their mid-range card first. If you look in the past, most of the time it's the top-end card that gets released up front, and then slowly but surely the lower-end cards kind of trickle their way down. But AMD's changing it up a bit, and Nvidia didn't let it last for too long, from what it seems.
So we just got that price announcement yesterday for the $249, which is MSRP on the GTX 1060. But the 480, we've already seen those out in the wild going for $240, which was above the $199 for the 4 gigabyte cards. Besides that whole the VRAM gate, if you want to even call it that, with not having the 4 gigabytes actually.
Yeah.
And the power issues now, which have been supposedly resolved with the new driver update. Did you try that, by the way?
And I haven't yet. Honestly, I haven't even put it in since I built that cheap computer, and then I did the SLI thing with DirectX 12. I need to do it though because a lot of people were pretty tense about that in the video where I talked about that. So it would be interesting to see if that is resolved with just a software issue, because it doesn't seem like it's software based. It doesn't seem like just a simple change in code will fix that issue. It seems more hardware based. So it'd be interesting to see if it works out.
Yeah, if you can recreate it like 10 times out of 10, with that build with the current drive, with the older driver, and then just go ahead and do nothing but update the driver and see if it fixes. I think that'd be really good to see that.
I think I might just do that without even editing anything. I'll just completely film it as is. That way people know I'm not trying to tamper with anything, and then just simply update the driver and see if the problem persists. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, so on the price though, it's coming out at $249 MSRP, and then they're saying the Founders Edition. Again, we're having to get stuck with the Nvidia tax of $300 for a Founders card, which I think is ridiculous. Does it really make this a $250 card? Knowing what we saw with the 1080 and the 1070 is, those were MSRP, $599 on the 1080. Show me a $599 1080.
Yeah, and especially with the type of card it is. I mean, it's a beautiful card, don't get me wrong, but the overclock ability with those cards, you can get it to where you want it to be, but at the expense of very high core temperatures, and that's not something that's very desirable, especially with the new Pascal technology. You don't want to be trading off that new, very thermal efficient technology for the sake of having a very overclockable card, and also, like you said, at a higher price point too. It's kind of oxymoronic in its own right.
Yeah, the higher price point is really what makes absolutely no sense. But as far as it just being, a reference card and the thermals, I didn't have any limitations I felt on my 1080 with how far I was able to push it with the core clock because of temperatures once I did set a custom fan curve. Whereas on my RX 480 that I tested, I absolutely did feel limited on the reference design, and it left me wanting more with a custom board from someone like MSI or Asus, Sapphire, whoever, to see, you know, how proper cooling can really keep that down. Because my card was hitting 90 degrees if I didn't adjust the fan curve, and it was definitely limiting it.
Mine wouldn't even let me get to, what'd you say it was, 1350 megahertz?
1350 megahertz, that was with a 50% power increase and all of that.
Okay, see, mine wouldn't even do that. Looks like you had a better bin card than I did. But I would get to 1350, and I'd pretty much push the voltage as high as I safely could go, and it was not letting me do that. I think 1330 was where I ended up leaving mine for the most part.
Yeah, you're not going to see too much difference there between, you know, 1330 and 1350.
Yeah, it's 20 megahertz, yeah.
Yeah, so I've got up a benchmark right here from the GTX 1060. Now, this was a leaked benchmark originally from XFaster. They had posted a Firestrike benchmark on normal, and then the RX 480 numbers that I have here are my own numbers on my own testing from the stock, and my overclock with 1350 megahertz. So you can kind of see on there that the 1060 is coming in right behind that 480 overclocked. And I also did my own guesstimation there for the 1060 as to where I think it might be able to hit, give it a 15% overclock. That's just a 15% adjustment to the stock score that we saw there. So that seems, you know, where I usually expect to see an overclock.
Yeah, that seems fair from my perspective as well. I mean, look at the 1070s and 1080s, how much of a frame rate gain we saw with just a moderate overclock on both of those cards. That, to me, that falls in line with what we were already seeing.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people like to, you know, say that, you know, Firestrike, it's not real world performance. But what I like about it is I do think it is a good apples to apples kind of like GPU ranking to kind of just find out where the core performance is on DX11 anyway. It's
essentially a heaven benchmark, I would say, without the frame rates. It's still pushing the GPUs to their limits. But I guess it's gauging the performance in a different way. It's not basing it on frame rates, it's basing it on an overall score, which I think is derived from frame rates anyway, if I'm not mistaken. So the end result's really the same, I would say.
Yeah, and with those custom coolers coming, we had seen some rumors already that the custom coolers on the 480s with overclocks and even water, they were talking about getting up to like 1.5 gigahertz on water. Yeah. So this was only at 1350. So how much further is that yellow bar going to move over to the right once we get custom coolers on there?
Exactly, yeah. And you know the 1060s are going to be great overclockers to begin with. So, you know, with those custom coolers on there, I think with respect to both brands and both cards, I think that it's going to be pretty close, at least from what we're seeing so far. Both of these cards have good overclocking potential, at least from what it looks like for the 480 when it comes to custom coolers. And we have some pictures of custom RX 480 coolers, and they look pretty awesome. They look very effective as well.
Yeah, we've seen some of them so far. We got some up here from Power Color with their Devil cards, which are usually like just the ridiculous overclocker cards. They usually have like custom BIOS and cooling, custom PCBs, everything on those cards. We got one from Gigabyte and MSI as well, Sapphire. So there's a lot of custom boards coming out, and I think that's really what we're going to need to see to get the full picture of the RX 480 and see what it can hit.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people are saying just in comments on my videos alone. You know, it's difficult to gauge the performance of a card based on its stock cooler, its reference cooler, and so that's why we're looking forward to this stuff for the most part. It's just because then we'll see really how far these things can be pushed, because most people are going to just purchase these cards and they're going to throw them into their rigs. Some of us will overclock, try to push them a little further, but for the most part, what you get is what you put into your rig and what you play with. So these out-of-the-box overclocks for both of these cards should bring things up quite a bit in terms of the graphs we were just looking at.
Yeah, and just, you know, even if the card's, you know, coming at like the $250 to $300 here on the 1060, they're saying it's, you know, going to be like 980 level performance, which is pretty close. That's pretty close, fairly accurate, I think. The 1060 is kind of looking like a heavily overclocked 970 or a stock 980 maybe.
Yeah, and we have that graph that you had, right? The
Firestrike one.
What's the one that has the 10970 graphs on it?
Oh yeah, we've got that up here. So yeah, this is this is kind of showing some graphs. I'll wind up overlaying this here because it's really hard to see for people. But yeah, this is kind of like, this is basically all the benchmarks that I did in my review of the 480 versus the 970. Which you could see it's really close. The games where the 480 pulls ahead by a lot is really the DX12 titles. Otherwise it's usually very neck and neck, with the 970 winning in some games.
Yep, and this looks to be in line with what we're expecting from Nvidia's 1060 as well. If they say it's on par with the 980, we're going to assume that's kind of like a stock 980. They're not going to compare it to an overclock 980 because that would be that would just do themselves a disservice. So if we say stock 90, we know that overclocked, severely overclocked 970s will approach 980 territory. So if that's true, what they're saying, then it looks like the 1060 will be very close to the RX 480 with these games here that you've already tested.
Yeah, and like I was mentioning, the ones where it really pulled ahead by a lot more was DX12, and that's the future. Future is DX12. We just saw today that there was a patch brought in for Rise of the Tomb Raider where they added in it already had DX12, but now they've added in async compute support. So in that type of testing, you should expect to see AMD cards pull ahead, and that's because they actually have it at the hardware level.
Exactly, hardware-based asynchronous compute, and it's interesting. We were talking about this earlier. The Tomb Raider, that game was bundled with the 970 and I think the 960, maybe a few other Nvidia graphics cards in the past. But it's nice to see the developers not being, I guess, biased in that way, because we do know, it's pretty obvious at this point, asynchronous compute favors AMD, and it's because it's on the hardware level. So it is good to see that they're extending that DirectX 12 support. This is the way of the future, folks. I mean, these games are only going to be DirectX 12 based in the near future. So it's good to see that they're starting to add these to games that have already been released on both DirectX 11 and 12 platforms.
Yeah, now I don't really know how far back, hardware level async compute goes for AMD, but someone had raised an interesting question to me yesterday. Do you think that this is maybe because they've already been supporting Mantle from the beginning, whereas NVIDIA they didn't do that, and so maybe they're kind of playing catch up on that sort of with low level APIs.
That could be the case. I mean, look at the 290. The 290X was outperforming the 980 Ti in DirectX 12 titles. I mean, this goes back 5-6 years, and this was before DirectX 12 was even thought of being put into games like this. So it goes back quite a ways. We're looking at Hawaii GPUs for the 290 and the 390X and all of those. So it looks rather daunting for NVIDIA at this point, unless they say they can fix this issue with software. Again, this is kind of similar to the power issue with the RX 480, the PCI power draw issue. They're saying that these things can be fixed with software, but software only goes so far. You can't change actual components on PCBs with software. So, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in asynchronous compute, but I don't believe. But I don't believe that it's going to be strictly software fixable. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No, they've basically kind of been able to just put up like a patch. This is like a Band-Aid for their cards, so that they can actually run these games and have them look the same, because there was even with the I remember with the GTX 1080 there was that press driver that they had showed against the RX 480s in Crossfire, and the games actually looked different, and it's because it was being handled differently in the driver by NVIDIA. It's since then been fixed, and it should be at least looking relatively the same, but the way that these cards actually handle it is completely differently. It's apples and oranges.
And when you can actually see the difference in gameplay, that there's just such a wide divide right now currently with the two technologies, and hopefully NVIDIA can start filling in that gap when it comes to asynchronous compute in DirectX 12 anyway, because AMD clearly has a lead in DirectX 12. So we'll see where it goes. Hopefully the high-end 1080s, 1070 cards can catch up via software, but I have my own personal doubts about that claim. It just doesn't add up to me.
So, given the information we have right now, and if we were to, kind of speculate with the aftermarket cards, if the 480 and the 1060 end up being really, really close with aftermarket cards and overclocking, all things considered, where would you want to go with one of those cards? Would you want to go with the 480? Let's say even if it's slightly behind, would it be worth it because of DX12 coming in the future?
Yeah, it depends. I would have to look specifically at DirectX 12 titles and how big of a lead the RX 480 has over the 1060 in that regard, or in those regards. Personally, I'm a fan of NVIDIA software. I love NVIDIA software. Shadowplay's great. I love their GeForce experience.
Yeah.
I guess it's just going to come down to preference. Personally, I think I would still go with the 1060. Just because of the software. But again, if you're somebody who doesn't use Shadowplay very much, I use that to record all of my on-screen activity, Same. By the way. It's just easy. You just pull it up and you can Control or Alt-9, whatever, and you start recording video on your screen. You can't do that with AMD. They don't have the ability to basically screen capture straight from the card. You have to use third-party software for that, so that's an extra added cost. But again, if you're not into that stuff, if you just play video games, honestly, the RX 480 is, in my opinion, more future-proof, just based on what we've seen so far with its ability to perform well in DirectX 12.
Yeah, I kind of hate myself for like basically 100% agreeing with you on the software side of things, because I feel like people are going to come after all these bunch of Nvidia fanboys, because it really I really do. I don't know what to tell you guys. Like I've used both sides. I've used Nvidia Control Panel. I've used Crimson. I've used all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Personally, I enjoy my user experience within the Nvidia drivers more.
Yeah, I mean, being labeled a fanboy is just something that seems to be going around a lot on YouTube. And it's just, I guess, a retaliation to, well, you don't agree with me, so therefore you must be a fanboy when it comes to video cards, at least, or maybe even CPUs when Zen's released. That should be interesting. But for the most part, it is entirely subjective. So whether or not you enjoy Crimson drivers and Crimson software, or you enjoy the GeForce experience, it's just preferential. There's nothing wrong with favoring one or the other. And look, we're both we're open about it. We're not hiding it. But that doesn't make us necessarily fanboys. I mean, if that's what makes us a fanboys, I guess that's what we are.
Yeah, because I've said this time again, is I do not care what the brand is on the side of the card. I really don't.
It's just got to be what I want, you know?
Yeah, it has to cater to my needs as a user, and if I'm put in a situation where AMD and Nvidia are just neck and neck, side by side, personally, I'm going to choose Nvidia because, well, right now I've got G-Sync monitors, so I do feel kind of locked in as a result of that. Yeah, exactly. And then also, I prefer their software, and Shadowplay is great. I can record my games with almost no performance impact.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. That's kind of the state of. I guess that's my state of mind currently. RX 480 does look to be a very compelling choice right now. I would never fault you for purchasing a $250 card that performs around the 980 performance. But at the same time, if you're somebody who does a lot of screen recording, or you tinker a lot with the NVIDIA software, and that's what you enjoy doing more than the Crimson side of things with AMD, I don't know, the Gaming Evolved, I guess that's the software they use for that, and then Plays.tv. It just depends. I like the refined, clean-cut look of the GeForce experience, but you may not, and I might be a fanboy for liking that, but so be it, I suppose. I
agree with you, though. I think for creators, it can be a little bit more useful to have NVIDIA, but recommending cards for like consumers out there that are just straight wanting to buy cards and wanting to future-proof and are concerned about DirectX 12, then
exactly
the 480 may be the better way to go. Now, just remember, though, this is based on speculation. We don't even have a 1060 yet here to test, so this is just us talking about what's coming in the future.
Exactly.
And we already know that the 480s, while I wouldn't recommend anyone buy two 480s versus a higher power card, they do support Crossfire. But on the 1060 side, we've actually seen some interesting, from the images, they've got no SLI fingers on there. So people are saying, no SLI support, which is very interesting to see.
NVIDIA hasn't yet said if the SLI bridge will be removed and everything will be transferred to the PCIe slot. It's just, from what it looks like, they're not going to have an SLI bridge, and they're kind of leaving us hanging at this point. Will the 1060 support SLI? Kind of up in the air.
Yeah, we've seen things in the past about NVLink, but I highly doubt that they would introduce that here at their lower end card on something like the GTX 1060.
They would have done on the 1080 if they were.
Yeah, that would have been big if they did that, and they would have played that up huge. They wouldn't have done it with this, silent, almost paper launch here of the GTX 1060.
Exactly.
That's kind of something I wanted to bring up, is because they've had a lot of supply issups with the 1080 and 1070. The prices have been astronomical.
Oh yeah.
As a result of their paper launch. Yep. Do you view what's happening right now with the 1060 as a paper launch? Because I personally do.
Yeah, of course. I think the 1060 appeals to a wider audience. The people who purchase the 1070s and the 1080s are going to be your more hardcore gamers, or people who game in 1440p or 4K, who have those monitors already and want to enjoy the experience in those higher resolutions. But for the most part, I think it's safe to say that the 1060 will appeal. But for the most part, I think it will be safe to say that the 1060 will appeal to a much wider audience, and that does beckon the concerns of availability, price hikes. Think about it. When you choke the supply, demand is way up here, and you don't have enough cards. The prices are going to be very high for the cards that are available, what little they will have.
Yeah, and on the topic of maybe not having enough 1060s available at launch, I just want to really quickly quote an article over on Anantech where they were talking about the 1060 yesterday. They said, in practice, NVIDIA has been receiving/processing GP106 for months, so the formal launch of the GTX 1060 doesn't change anything, but it nonetheless hints that NVIDIA is struggling at some point in their supply chain to meet demand. So based on that, it sounds like they may struggle with this card just as much as they did with the 1070 and 1080. And, you know, I had kind of thought maybe that was because of DDR5X on the 1080, but it's been trickling down into the 1070 also.
Yep. I mean, look, the company, right underneath that sentence you just finished up reading, officially the company has stated they expect broad availability of the card and that they are ramping up supply really fast, quote unquote. But it's definitely a case where we're going to have to wait and see. And that's kind of the same thing that they were saying about the 1070, 1080. Obviously, both of those cards had a lot of exposure before you could actually purchase them, except for those who had review samples already. So a lot of that was kind of building up underneath. And then they said, oh, we have 1070s available now. And then they were all gone within like the first 5 minutes on every website. Trust me, I was up at midnight checking. They were all gone within the first 5 minutes. So, you know, I expect the 1060 to be much of the same, if not worse, personally, just because I think
more people can afford them.
Exactly. They're going to want this card because it's cheaper and you're getting 980 performance out of it. That looks like as good a bargain, if not a better bargain than the RX 480 at this point.
Yeah, it very well may be. Maybe not necessarily on the Founders Edition at $300, but if you can actually find cards at that $249 price point, that is very attractive.
It is.
You know, if it comes out and, you know, it's around $300 and it's, you know, maybe 10% faster, but it's costing like 25% more, then you may have to start thinking about it, or if it's worth it to you in your budget, you know?
Yeah, and that just comes down to preference. What I will say is that, and I talked about this in one of my videos, if you're looking for one of these cards, let's say you're looking for a 1060, it's been released. When's the release date for the 1060, by the way? I should know that.
July 19th.
July 19th. So let's say it's July 20th, and you're online looking for a 1060. You can't find one anywhere. Newegg, Amazon, wherever else you're looking, NCIX.
I think that's a foregone conclusion at this point, that on the 20th there won't be any 1060s.
There won't
to
be,
found.
So let's just say there's not going to be. It's a definite thing at this point. There's not going to be any 1060s available. So your, I guess, second instinct might be to check eBay. Do not spend $500 on a 1060. It's so, yeah, just wait. I mean, yeah, you want a card up front, unless you don't have a graphics card and you really need to do something up front. And I guess in that sense, you're all, by all means. I mean, it's your money, but I would never personally spend $400 to $500 on a card like that. And you could buy a GTX 1070 for cheaper than that right now, and they are starting to creep back into stock right now. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, and plus once this comes out and we see the performance, you're going to see the price of those other cards like the 980s and 970 used pricing is just going to drop.
Exactly.
Especially when you go to eBay and you're looking at those 1060s for $500, just do another search for the GTX 980.
Exactly.
and you'll find it at like probably more than less than half the price of that. So
yeah, it's not as relevant now, but I released a video about the 980 Ti. I mean, the gold edition from MSI, which is a $550 card, was going for $420.
Yep.
And that's something that I recommended at that point in time because the 1070 was not available. You couldn't find it anywhere. I was checking day in and day out, couldn't find the card, so I said, screw it. I'm going to buy a 980 Ti because, well, they're available and they're super cheap. And as I showed in one of the benchmarking videos, they're pretty much the same in terms of performance and overclockability. So, I mean, consider that. Like you said, look at the 980s, look at the 970s even. You can get an overclocked 970 that'll perform on par with some of the 980s out there. So, you know, look at those before you spend $500 on something that is not worth that price at all.
Yep. Yeah, so I'll be curious to see these reviews. I've heard some rumors that we should be seeing reviews sometime around maybe like the 14th or the 15th. So that's a little bit ahead of when the cards are coming out on the 19th. So definitely we'll keep our eyes out for that. But I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up and get out of here now.
Yes, sir.
If you guys want to go check out Science Studio, I'll have a link to his channel down in the description below, as well as I'm sure he'll be linking to my channel on his upload because he's uploading on his channel too.
Yep, the exact same thing. So don't worry, you don't have to watch it twice. It's okay.
Yep. You guys can watch it twice if you want. Watch it here.
If you want to help us out.
Watch it there. All that good stuff.
If you're really that cool, if you want to be that cool. Okay.
Yep. All right. Thank you so much for joining me, Greg, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks for having me. See you guys.
Ta-ra.